Commander Silith Vaynar walked through the corridor of the Antheris Command Center, and conversations died like candles in vacuum. Officers pressed themselves against walls to clear her path. Junior personnel found urgent reasons to examine their datapads. Everyone maintained perfect military bearing, while radiating the kind of tension that came from being in the presence of someone whose reputation suggested she could kill you with disappointment alone. Silith was accustomed to this. In 15 years of military service, she'd learned that fear was more efficient than affection for maintaining discipline. Her soldiers performed at peak capacity because failure meant facing her displeasure, which was apparently more terrifying than actual combat situations. She entered the briefing room where the Terran diplomatic delegation waited. The humans stood when she entered, proper protocol, and maintained polite expressions while their body language screamed discomfort at being in the same room with the Kethrian commander, whose reputation preceded her across 3-star systems. "I am Commander Silith Vaynar," she announced with the clipped formality that was her default communication mode. "I will brief you on security protocols for your humanitarian operations. Questions will be addressed after the presentation." She began outlining access restrictions, security checkpoints, and civilian interaction guidelines with the precision that made her briefings famous, or infamous, depending on perspective. Her officers could recite her presentations verbatim, because deviation from established protocols was not something Commander Vaynar tolerated. 30 minutes into the briefing, one of the humans raised his hand. Silith paused, prepared to address whatever clarification was needed. "Dr. Marcus Reed, psychological advisor," the human identified himself. Then he said something that made the room's temperature drop. "Are you all right? You look exhausted." Absolute silence. The Kethrian officers present seemed to stop breathing. Lieutenant Thane, who'd served under Silith for 6 years, actually closed his eyes like he couldn't bear to witness what was about to happen to this foolish human who just addressed Commander Vaynar as if she were a person with feelings rather than a military asset. Silith stared at the human Marcus Reed, with the focus she normally reserved for tactical assessments of enemy positions. He looked back without the fear everyone else displayed, seemingly unaware that he'd just committed what her troops would consider social suicide. "Personal observations are inappropriate during security briefings," Silith said, her voice carrying the ice that made subordinates tremble. "The briefing will continue." "Of course, my apologies, Commander." Marcus sat down, and Silith noted he didn't look properly chastened, just politely redirected. She continued the briefing with perfect professionalism, but something had cracked in her carefully maintained armor. Because someone had noticed she was tired. Someone had expressed concern rather than fear, and Silith Vaynar had no idea how to process that. Over the following weeks, Marcus Reed continued demonstrating his remarkable failure to develop appropriate fear of Commander Vaynar. He asked practical questions about civilian access to secured areas. He requested modifications to security protocols that might reduce population anxiety. He thanked her for accommodating humanitarian needs with gratitude that seemed genuine rather than fearfully performative. His behavior should have annoyed Silith. Instead, it created cognitive dissonance she hadn't experienced since her early career. Someone was treating her like a competent professional rather than a terrifying legend. "Commander, the Trauma Counseling Center needs extended hours for civilian access," Marcus said during one of their coordination meetings. "Would it be possible to adjust the curfew restrictions for that specific location?" Silith reviewed the request against security concerns, made her assessment, and approved the modification. "The adjustment will be implemented tomorrow." "Thank you, I appreciate your flexibility on this." Marcus made a note on his datapad. "Also, you've been working for about 16 hours today. Here." He pushed a cup across the table. "Coffee. Human variety. But the caffeine content should work for Kethrian metabolism too." Silith stared at the coffee like it might be a tactical threat. "Why?" Because caffeine helps when you've been working too long, and you seem to be working too long most days. Marcus said it like this was obvious rather than presumptuous. That's not your concern. Professionally, it kind of is. Exhausted commanders make errors. Errors get people killed. Therefore, commanders staying functional is relevant to my job of keeping populations alive. He smiled slightly. Also, basic courtesy suggests offering coffee to colleagues during late meetings. You don't have to drink it. Silith looked at the coffee, at Marcus, who was already returning his attention to the schedule planning, at the complete absence of fear in his demeanor. She picked up the coffee and drank it because not doing so would be acknowledging that his gesture had affected her. It tasted terrible. Humans apparently enjoyed bitter beverages, but something about the gesture itself was. She didn't have words for what it was. Uncomfortable, unfamiliar, possibly nice in ways she'd forgotten to recognize. Her officers noticed this irregular dynamic. Lieutenant Thane asked carefully if the human's overfamiliarity was problematic and should be addressed. Dr. Reed is performing his duties adequately, Silith said. His communication style is unconventional, but not interfering with operations. What she didn't say was that Marcus Reed had become the only person who treated her like someone who might appreciate basic courtesy, rather than a weapon to be deployed and maintained at operational readiness. And she was starving for that treatment in ways she'd spent years not acknowledging. The memorial service was mandatory attendance for all senior military and diplomatic personnel. Silith stood in full ceremonial uniform while Kethrian families mourned civilians killed in the territorial conflict that had preceded peacekeeping deployment. The service followed traditional format, controlled, formal, with grief expressed through carefully structured ritual rather than open emotion. Silith maintained perfect military bearing throughout, her expression neutral and professional. She'd attended hundreds of memorial services in her career. They were part of command responsibility, witnessing the cost of decisions made, honoring those who died, embodying the strength that justified continued operations. The service reached the communal mourning portion where attendees could approach the memorial wall and offer personal acknowledgments. Silith remained at her position, observing, until a child approached her directly. The girl was maybe 6 years old, wearing mourning colors, her long ears tilted down in sadness. She looked up at Silith with the devastating directness only children possess and asked, "Why couldn't the soldiers save my mother?" It was an innocent question. The child didn't understand that peacekeeping forces arrived after the conflict ended, that preventing deaths in the past wasn't possible, that Silith's troops were preventing future casualties rather than undoing previous ones. But the question hit Silith like a physical blow. 15 years. 15 years of making impossible decisions that cost lives. 15 years of carrying responsibility for deaths she couldn't prevent. 15 years of maintaining perfect control over emotions that would interfere with the ruthless calculations her position demanded. All of that weight concentrated into one child's simple question. Why couldn't you save her? Silith tried to deliver the formal response, tried to explain about timelines and peacekeeping mandates and doing everything possible to prevent future losses. But her voice cracked halfway through the first sentence. And then, in front of hundreds of people who'd only ever seen her as an unstoppable force, Commander Silith Vaynar started crying. Not controlled tears that could be dismissed as emotional acknowledgement of loss. Full breakdown crying. 15 years of suppressed grief and exhaustion, and loneliness pouring out in front of an audience who believed she was incapable of such vulnerability. The memorial service descended into shocked silence. Officers who'd served under Silith for years stared in disbelief. Some looked away in discomfort, unable to process seeing their invincible commander sobbing openly. The only person who moved was Marcus Reed. He crossed the memorial space without hesitation and did something nobody else would dare. He put a hand on Silith's shoulder in quiet support. He didn't try to stop her crying or rush her toward recovery. He just stood there, offering presence without judgment, while the woman everyone feared finally broke under weight she'd been carrying alone for too long. Silith's senior staff coordinated her quiet departure from the memorial service while Marcus provided cover, his presence somehow making the situation less catastrophically embarrassing, because at least one person didn't seem horrified by her complete breakdown. Later, in her private quarters after she'd regained enough composure to face the aftermath, Lieutenant Thane requested audience with unusual formality. "Commander." He stood at attention, but his expression carried something she'd never seen from him before. "Shame, I need to apologize. We all do. Your senior staff is waiting outside if you'll permit them entry." Silith, still exhausted from crying that had come from somewhere deep and painful, nodded. 6 officers entered, all maintaining formal bearing that barely concealed their discomfort. They'd served under her for years, feared her for years, and were now clearly struggling with seeing her as something other than an invincible force. "We've spent years maintaining professional distance because your reputation and our fear made treating you as fully human feel dangerous," Thane said carefully. "We failed to recognize that someone carrying that much responsibility and maintaining that much control was obviously paying a terrible personal cost. It took your breakdown for us to see you as someone who needed support, rather than just someone to fear and obey." "That's not your fault," Silith managed. "Fear is efficient for maintaining discipline. Fear prevented us from being loyal in ways that actually matter," another officer, Captain Vess, corrected gently. "We would have followed any order because we were afraid of disappointing you. But none of us were taking care of the person behind those orders. That's not loyalty. That's just obedience maintained through terror. I never asked for more than obedience." "Because you didn't think you could ask for more without appearing weak." Thane's voice was quiet. "But Commander, what we witnessed today wasn't weakness. It was evidence that you've been carrying unbearable weight alone. And we should have noticed that years ago." They left after offering support she didn't know how to accept but was grateful to receive. The next morning, Marcus visited with coffee, better quality than last time, suggesting he'd been researching Kethrian preferences. "How are you actually feeling?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her desk without waiting for invitation. Silith considered giving the formal response about operational readiness and continued command capability. Instead, exhausted and still raw from yesterday's breakdown, she told the truth. "Exhausted, lonely, carrying weight that's been crushing me for years while maintaining appearance of strength because that's what my position demands. Yesterday was 15 years of that weight finally becoming too much." She met his eyes. "You're the only person who's asked how I'm feeling without fear in months, maybe years." Fear is terrible foundation for command because it prevents people around you from recognizing when you need support. Marcus sipped his coffee. "Your troops respected your competence and feared your reaction to failure. But nobody was taking care of the person behind the reputation. That's not sustainable. I didn't think it needed to be. I thought strength meant not needing support." "Strength means knowing when to ask for support so you don't collapse under weight you're carrying alone. What you did yesterday, breaking down publicly, was actually braver than maintaining perfect control forever. It was honest." He smiled slightly. "Also, it transformed your command staff from terrified subordinates into people who actually want to help shoulder your burden. That's better loyalty than fear ever created." Over the following weeks, Silith's relationship with her command staff transformed. They learned to balance respect with recognition that their commander was a person who experienced exhaustion, doubt, and the weight of responsibility. They started redistributing workload when she worked too long. They began offering input on decisions rather than just executing orders. They treated her like someone they wanted to protect rather than someone they feared disappointing. Marcus continued his matter-of-fact courtesy that acknowledged her competence while recognizing her humanity. He brought her food when she worked too long. He suggested she delegate more. He asked how she was doing with genuine interest. And slowly, Syleth rebuilt not just from her public breakdown but from 15 years of isolation enforced by others' fear. She discovered that vulnerability didn't destroy authority. It built trust. Her officers were more loyal now that they saw her as someone fighting alongside them rather than an invincible force above them. Her troops performed better because they wanted to support her rather than just avoid her displeasure. Marcus's refusal to fear her wasn't ignorance. It was healthy recognition that competent people deserve respect without terror. The woman who'd been feared most became someone her troops would follow anywhere, not because they were afraid, but because they'd seen her carry impossible weight with grace and wanted to help shoulder that burden. And Marcus remained in her life as someone she could be honest with about the cost of command. Someone who'd witnessed her complete breakdown and responded not with judgment, but with the simple recognition that even the strongest people need someone who treats them as human rather than legend. Those who feared her most learned they should have felt sorry for her burden all along. Realizing that transformed terror into empathy, creating loyalty built on recognition of shared humanity rather than fear of disappointment. Some commanders lead through fear. Others lead through inspiration. The best lead through trust built on honest recognition that strength includes admitting vulnerability, that bearing weight alone is unsustainable, and that the people around you can only help if you let them see that you're human too. Syleth learned that lesson through breaking completely. But what she built afterward, command founded on trust rather than terror, relationships based on mutual support rather than fearful obedience, proved that vulnerability, honestly expressed, creates stronger bonds than invincibility ever could. The child's question had shattered her armor, but what emerged from